Dear, do you think my juniors will ever figure out the real reason I'm doing this video lecture project is just to teach them how a gentleman dresses on his day off? Yeah, you're probably right. I'm sure the girls figured that right away. They're pretty smart. But will the boys ever get on my level? Hello, and welcome back to our morality class. Today is going to be the second part in our series on the Fourth Commandment. You'll remember the last part was that little quiz we did where we figured out that it's the family, not just the individual, that's the cell or the building block of all of society. Today, we're going to pick up with the real central part of this commandment, the obligations of children to their parents and of parents to their children. Please note that our thesis for the day is that those obligations are going to be mutual, and there's a real common sense correlation between them. But before we can get into those obligations, I need to explain to you what this thing over here that you're staring at is and why it's in our digital classroom. Now, the obvious part is it's an easel. It was lent to me by an artist family member so I could use it for these lectures and lessons. I'm very grateful to them, so thank you, you know who you are, for sharing this. I hope you're happy to see it make an appearance. But I also need to take a moment and explain where this idea is coming from. You're about to get a history lesson, kids, on the late, great, soon-to-be saint, Archbishop Fulton Sheen. This guy was an archbishop, and he had a television show, and it was one of the most widely watched shows in America. Like, just on cable news, you might sit down on a weeknight and Fulton Sheen's on. That's what we're going to watch. And he would get up and teach about the Christian faith and how it's just part of our life and how it orders our society well. And he, his shtick, his common thing was he always had his blackboard and little angel assistants to help him erase it when he was off screen so he could keep putting more and more notes up. He had a digital classroom that he got to broadcast out to the whole country. He was a pioneer in sort of using new technology at the time, televisions being in everyone's living rooms, for evangelization. And he was a real role model of mine and someone I'm really looking up to now as I try this YouTube product. So kids, if you haven't seen or heard Fulton Sheen, sit down with your grandparents sometime, pull up YouTube. Some of his episodes are on YouTube now, and get a little history lesson from them. They'll really appreciate it. It'll take them back, and you might learn something. So, without further ado, that's something your grandparents are going to have to explain to you. We're going to talk today about the relationship between parents and children and the mutual obligations imposed on this relationship, but really that naturally grow out of this relationship based on the Fourth Commandment. Now, you'll all remember at this point that the text of the Fourth Commandment says, honor your father and mother. It should be clear that this is a direct instruction to children. But it's also clear based on our last lesson that when we're talking to children, we're talking to literally every human being who's ever been alive, because that's the universal human relationship. So while strictly speaking, I'm going to lay out for you the obligations of parents to their children in the strict sense of that relationship, later we're going to extrapolate out to other relationships and show how they are analogous to and parallel to this relationship between parents and children. So, parents, children. And their mutual obligation. What do we mean by parents? What do we mean by children? Strictly speaking, we're talking about a biological relationship, but again, it has much further extension than mere biology. We talked about parents as parent figures, those people who do the parent thing for you. So as we understand these obligations. Just keep track of the fact that you might have more than two people here, and they might be fulfilling different parts of different roles. More on that in the next lesson. The fundamental thing that your parents gave you is life. Now that sounds really obvious, and it sounds really simple, but it's also ridiculously easy to overlook just the magnitude and the pervasiveness of this gift. It's literally the foundation of anything else. In turn, you owe your parents gratitude, which I'm going to abbreviate. Gratitude. The extent of this gratitude is easy to underestimate, and here's why. Because this is literally the foundation of everything you have. Are you angry at your parents? Good. That presupposes you have a body and a soul and good emotional health and can apprehend what's going on and communicate and be aware of your feelings. Those are all life functions. Before you even get to vent your anger at them, you need to be thankful to them for those things. This isn't just they gave you life once, they conceived you or gave birth to you, etc. This is the fact that you are alive right now is the result of their continued action on your behalf. They didn't just conceive you. They didn't just give birth to you. They didn't just feed you and take you home from the hospital. The fact that you can walk, talk, speak, eat, keep yourself out of danger, communicate your needs, those are all life functions. And every single one of them requires gratitude. Catechism of the Catholic Church puts this in a punchy way. I'm reading paragraph 2215. Parents who, by the gift of life, their love, and their work, have brought their children into the world and enabled them to grow in stature, wisdom, and grace. And then it goes on to quote from the book of Ben Sira in the Old Testament. Remember that through your parents you were born. What can you give back to them that equals their gift to you? What can you give back to them that equals their gift to you? Think that through for a second. Any gift you ever give your parents presupposes you are alive to give it. Any good deed you do for your parents, any mark of respect you show your parents, is making use of the gift they've already given you. It's always secondary. The bottom line here is they loved you first. Before you were born, when your mother was carrying you, and your parents talked to each other and said, oh, I wonder if it'll be a boy or a girl. Oh, I'm so excited. Aren't we blessed? They loved you before you were even capable of giving anything back. This relationship, this life and gratitude, this is going to be the foundation on which our other obligations are built. And please notice, there's a real logic and a real mutual complementarity to these two gifts. They gave you life. You need to say thank you. You are still alive. You still need to say thank you. Really obvious corollary. When do you get to stop being grateful to your parents? When you're not alive anymore. That's when. Until then, yeah, they get a thank you from you. Next, we're going to proceed more or less chronologically here. What did your parents do after you were alive? Well, the next thing they did for you was care for you. Your mom probably changed her diet while she was pregnant with you to make sure you were getting the nutrients you're needing. Your dad probably made some changes to, say, his career or his finance or whatever it was to make sure everything was ready and stable to bring you into the world with everything you needed for it. They fed you, and they changed your diaper, and they held you when you cried. They did these things, again, before you were even capable of expressing gratitude. They cared for you. The next thing they did for you was that they started to educate you. Now, to be clear, when we talk about education, in this context, I'm not talking about calculus. I'm not talking about physics. I'm not talking about reading the Summa Theologica or teaching you Latin. I'm talking about important education. The more important, the more fundamental education. You can walk, you can talk. You know that there's such a thing as right and wrong, and you know you're supposed to do the right thing and avoid the wrong thing. You know to wash your hands. Who would have thought that would be this amazing life-saving skill, but it's your parents who taught you to do it. You know to dress yourself in the morning, to bathe every day, to eat healthy enough. They educated you. They taught you that when you have really strong feelings like being angry, you don't get to act out that anger. That's what we mean by education. The higher academic subjects, optional for a handful of really well-off, privileged, wealthy kids who get to do ridiculous things like go to prep school. But for all of humanity, education. Please understand, there's something else that goes with education. In fact, once you understand what's going on in the Latin here, it's almost a synonym for education. To educate is to discipline. Those are one and the same thing. See, your parents taught you to behave a certain way, to say no to some things and yes to others. That's what we mean by discipline. They gave you structure, they gave you expectations, and they held you up to those expectations consistently in a way that probably drove you nuts, and maybe still does. Our Latin word student, discipulus, literally disciple, comes from here, discipline. To be taught is to be disciplined. It's to learn the right habits and conduct yourself in a certain way. Now, I want to read again a little bit from the Catechism for you to clarify what we're talking about with care, followed by education and discipline. I'm reading paragraphs 2221 and 2223. Parents bear witness to their responsibility first by creating a home where tenderness, forgiveness, respect, fidelity, and disinterested service are the rule. The home is well suited for education in the virtues. Notice the kind of education we're talking about. This requires an apprenticeship in self-denial, sound judgment, and self-mastery, the preconditions of all true freedom. The ability to say no to wrong and say yes to right is what makes you a free human being. You got that from your parents. That's what we mean by education and discipline. The role of parents in education is of such importance that it is almost impossible to provide an adequate substitute. The right and the duty of parents to educate their children are primordial and inalienable. Education starts with the parents, ends with the parents. They taught you everything. And if you don't understand that, then maybe you need to check your definition of education. First they made you, then they cared for you and taught you so you could live well. And all this time you still haven't done a thing for them other than what? Be cute, and only some of the time. Now let's start looking at the obligations of children back to their parents. See, now that we understand what we mean by education and discipline, it should be obvious where your obligations to your parents begin. And they start right here. Everyone's favorite word, everyone's favorite idea and thing they need to be told: obedience. Don't we love being obedient? Don't we love just obeying what other people tell us because they said so? No, of course we don't. But we don't because we're afflicted by original sin and because we're full of pride. Your parents cannot teach you, your parents cannot discipline you if you do not obey their instruction. This isn't arbitrary, this isn't authoritarian, it's not a power dynamic. You can't really think a family is about love and try to apply the political language of power dynamics to this. It doesn't work. It's sheer nature. Your parents cannot teach you. They cannot teach you discipline, they cannot teach you virtue if you don't obey their instructions. Sometimes this is a matter going all the way back up to life and death, right? When your parents teach you as a small child not to run out into the street, you need to obey not just for the sake of your own freedom and human flourishing, but just to stay alive. And later, when you're in, say, elementary school, and your mom's trying to explain to you how friendships work and why sometimes other kids are mean, if you want to understand and learn how to behave well, you're going to have to do what she tells you, which is probably go say sorry, or I forgive you. But you can't learn the lessons if you don't actually carry out the behavior. Remember, education isn't a function of having information in your brain, it's a function of how you behave, how you conduct your life. It's about habits, it's about virtue. And when you're, say, in high school and college and thinking carefully about what you're going to do for grades, for college, for work, for career, what you're going to major in, etc., if your parents give you strict instructions, they're going to be trying to help you. You're not going to learn what they want you to learn, and you're not going to get out of it what they need you to if you're not playing along, if you're not doing what they say. Let me read to you a little bit about obedience from the Catechism. I'm in paragraphs 22:1.6 and 22:1.7. Filial respect is shown by true docility and obedience. Docility, to be docile, is to be teachable, and obedience. You'll notice the Catechism puts those words right next to each other. Teachable, obedient. As long as a child lives at home with his parents, the child should obey his parents in all they ask of him, whether it is for his good or that of the family. If you're still living under your parents' roof, then you owe them obedience, both as a matter of justice and obligation, but also as a matter of love and fulfilling this dynamic. They're caring for you. You owe them gratitude. They're teaching you. You gotta learn. There's an exception here, and I want to take a moment and note this exception. Later on, the Catechism is going to draw a distinction. It's going to say just obedience. That doesn't mean only obedience. It means obedience insofar as it fulfills justice. Let me explain. Here it is. If a child is convinced in conscience that it would be morally wrong to obey a particular order, he must not do so. What is the idea here? Your obligation to your parents is for the sake of being raised in virtue. If your parents order you to sin, don't. If your parents order you to do something evil, don't. That's the only circumstance under which you have a right and an obligation not to obey them. If your parents tell you, order you to go and do something wicked, not something you don't agree with, not something you think you know how to do better, but something objectively evil, bad moral object, say, those are the circumstances under which you disobey. Those are the only circumstances under which you disobey. God is your father even before your father is your father. He comes first. And just like you wouldn't say, disobey your parents to follow the instruction of your older brother, you don't disobey the instruction of your first father in heaven to obey the instructions of your father here on the ground. That's the idea behind this obedience, the limits on this obedience, the fact that it's a matter of justice. Just obedience. Obedience insofar as you're not doing anything evil. Good. And again, we noted already how these two logically go together. So, as you continue to grow up, as your parents continue to educate/discipline you, as you grow in virtue, here's their next obligation to you. They need to respect you as an adult when you become an adult. You ain't there yet, guys. Sorry. I'm going to guess that many of your conflicts with your parents right now, and especially this tends to be guys at your age, are functions of respect. You feel you're not getting the respect you deserve. And you're probably very, very slightly right, and you're probably mostly wrong. Sorry. The move from education and discipline into respect correlates to your move into adulthood. Are you an adult yet? Do you have your own job? Do you have your own career? Do you have your own house? Do you have your own responsibilities? Then you're not totally here yet. You are in this process. You're moving down this arrow. As you start making decisions that are going to define who you are as an adult, your parents should and will gradually increase in respect. The way this looks to you guys is they start giving you more and more freedom. They start letting you make more of your own decisions. You used to not be able to pick who you hang out with or until what time. Now you can. You used to probably not be able to pick what classes you were going to take. Now you can. And probably, your parents didn't insist that you go and get this particular job. Probably they said, go get a job and you get to pick which ones you applied to. Where this obligation reaches its fulfillment is when you are truly distinguishing yourself as an adult outside of their own home as the head of your own household or family. Let me read to you from paragraphs 2230 and 2231. When they become adults, children have the right and duty to choose their profession and state of life. They should assume their new responsibilities with a trusting relationship with their parents, willingly asking and receiving their advice and counsel. Parents should be careful not to exert pressure on their children, either in the choice of a profession or in that of a spouse. You choose, if you marry, who you marry, and your parents will respect that. That's when you exert your adulthood. Just don't try to rush those decisions. And note, 2231, some forego marriage in order to care for parents or brothers or sisters, or to give themselves more completely to a profession, or to serve other honorable ends. They contribute greatly to the good of the human family. If you choose not to marry, if you choose a career they don't like, if you choose not to have a career and instead to, say, enter the religious life or the priesthood, that is something they should respect. And again, notice, there's a correlative obligation on you. You need to respect your parents back. By the way, this is what adulthood looks like. You and your parents, both adults, both have mutual respect. They're not trying to boss you around. You are not obeying orders. But there's a resemblance to that relationship here. You should still ask your parents' advice. You should still do things that they like or appreciate just to make them happy. That's what your affection and respect, which has the character of gratitude, should look like. When you are an adult, when you finish the whole education thing and you're on the way and the whole job thing and maybe you're planning your wedding or getting married, then your respect to your parents will have the character of gratitude. You ask them, what should I do? Not because you have to follow their orders, but because you want to think over what they say, and maybe sometimes you humor them and pick the way they would have you do it, even if it's not what you would like. And likewise, they will be so proud of you. Look at how she grew up to be. Look at the man he turned into, right? We're going to give him a space. He's doing well. We're going to let her make her decisions. She's doing them right. We taught her. and she's doing it well, they will continue to give you advice. Because that, as an adult, is how they continue to give you life and continue to form you, and how they continue to care for you. These things don't quite go away. Your respect for your parents. I'm reading now in paragraph 22:17. As they grow up, children should continue to respect their parents. They should anticipate their wishes, willingly seek their advice, and accept their just admonitions. That means they get to scold you even when you're an adult. Put up with it. Obedience toward parents ceases with the emancipation of the children, not so respect, which is always owed to them. This respect has its roots in the fear of God, one of the gifts of the Holy Spirit. The difference between the fact that you owe your parents obedience now and that as an adult you will owe them respect is when you no longer conduct yourself as a child to them, when you are financially and socially independent, when you got your own house and your own job and your own spouse and start having your own kids. When you move out, that's when this goes away. Not until. You haven't earned this yet. You're still here. You'll get there. You'll get there. So is that it? Are we good? You're both adults now, right? And you both have mutual obligations that you fulfill for one another, right? But obviously we've missed something. See, your parents have still given you something you haven't reciprocated. And guess what? Well, you're becoming an adult and starting your own family and doing what they did 20-something years ago. They're now becoming old and elderly and frail. And they will need help. And it will fall on you to take care of them. Your parents are going to be old and you're going to think they should retire, and they're going to think, no, we should keep working. Or they're going to get old and you're going to think you can't be in that big house all alone by yourself. It's dangerous. What if you fall? And they're going to say, yeah, but you're not putting me in some home. You come take care of me. That's going to be tense. And they're going to be stubborn because they're old, and it's going to drive you nuts. And every time that happens, you are going to be reminded of just how stubborn you must have been as a little kid when they had to care for you. And you're going to be reminded about how difficult you must have been because they're going to do it back to you, not deliberately, just as a function of nature. And then, that's how this all ends. See, your parents' obligations to you as a child end when you're an adult. From that point on, you're an adult, they're an adult. You're a family member, and they give you advice and guidance and hang out, etc. Your obligations to your parents don't end as long as your parents are alive. Again, it's a function of the fact that what they gave you was life. You have obligations to your parents and anyone who has fulfilled these roles for you. And your parents have obligations to you. These obligations are mutual. They logically go together. And in fact, you can't really imagine a relationship functioning without them. You're not alive without your parents. And yes, that is a gift you received. They loved you first. They started this process, not you. Say thank you. They care for you. There's not really anything you can do about it, because at this point, you're in your infancy. Then, as you are in your youth, both your childhood and your young adulthood, you need to obey your parents, even though that's hard and frustrating because you're starting to have ideas of your own, and they need to give you education and discipline, cultivation of virtue, how to be good at being human. They've done it for quite a while. You still have a lot to learn from them. But obviously, they can't do that if you don't obey. If they try to tell you to do one thing and you do the opposite, how are they supposed to teach you anything? And then here, in your adulthood. You graduate to this level of mutual respect. It's hard to imagine your parents respecting you if you don't respect them, and vice versa. If you never call, if you never reach out, if you never go back and say thank you, if you never go over and see them for dinner, how are they going to give you this life-giving encouragement and support and guidance that you will need when you're trying to raise kids of your own and they're the experts you want to consult? And if they don't give you some of that, if they don't give you some guidance and some support and some encouragement, why would you reach back out? Again, notice the mutuality of these obligations. And lastly, care. Were you cute as a kid? Of course. Were you also difficult? Absolutely. Guess what they're going to be like as old people? They're going to be sweet, and they're going to be obnoxious. And you're going to learn a lot about raising your own kids when you're caring for elderly parents. They make sense. They're mutual. The obligations go together. They're life-giving. And they're beautiful, full of joy and respect. And we have good spiritual support for all of them. Because remember, the whole relationship between you and your parents is analogous to and secondary to your relationship to God as your Father. The last point I want to make that I need you to reflect on is this. Most often throughout Scripture and throughout our prayers, we call God our Father. All of this is an extension of, or even a symbol of, how God has loved us first. Parents to children, children to parents. You shall honor your father and mother. Thank you guys for tuning in. God bless.